Emil Hartwell woke a few minutes before 6 to the sound of 31 clocks disagreeing with one another downstairs, which was, to his ear, the most reassuring sound in the world. They were never quite in unison, and he had long ago stopped trying to make them so. A shop full of clocks was a shop full of individual opinions. The tall case clock by the door running a half-second behind the wall regulator, the little French carriage clock on the second shelf running a shade ahead of everything, the whole room keeping up a soft, irregular conversation with itself all day and all night, so that a man sleeping in the rooms above heard not ticking exactly, but something closer to rainfall, 31 small sounds arriving at 31 slightly different moments, forever. He dressed in the gray light, an old man's unhurried dressing, and came down the inside stair into the shop before he'd so much as put the kettle on, because the first thing that happened in this building every morning of the last 41 years had been the winding, and Emil saw no particular reason at 73 to start doing it second. He wound them in the same order he had always wound them, moving along the shelves with the winding key in his hand the way another man might move along a line of stalls with a feed bucket. The regulator first, because everything else in the room was set against it. A tall, plain, severe instrument in a mahogany case, the only clock in the shop Emil never sold, never lent, and never permitted his apprentice to touch. It gained perhaps 4 seconds a month. He had spent 11 years getting it to that, and considered it, quietly and without ever saying so aloud, the finest thing he had ever done with his hands. Then the mantel clocks, the shelf clocks, the 2 banjo clocks, the little carriage clock, and last the tall case clock by the door with its slow, heavy pendulum, which took a good long while to settle back into its rhythm after winding, and which Emil always paused a moment to watch, because a pendulum finding its swing again was, he had decided somewhere in his 60s, one of the small pleasures the trade offered a man free of charge. Peter came in at 7:30, 17 years old, and 8 months into an apprenticeship that Emil privately judged to be going rather better than he'd expected when the boy's father had first proposed it. "Morning, Mr. Hartwell." "Morning. Bench is laid out. You'll do the Coleman movement today, all of it, and I'll not touch it." Peter's face did something complicated at that, pride and alarm arriving at the same moment, and Emil turned away toward the front window so the boy wouldn't have to manage being watched while he decided which of the 2 feelings to lead with. The morning's first customer was Harlan Voss, who came the first Tuesday of every month and had done so for 9 years, and who set his railroad watch on the counter with the particular care of a man handling the single most important object he owned. Been running a touch fast, I think. Maybe 5 seconds on the week. We'll see what it says. Emil took up the watch. A heavy open face movement, 21 jewels, the sort of thing a man on the line spent 3 months' wages on and then carried for 30 years, and set it against the regulator, and the 2 of them stood in the quiet and waited, because there was no way to hurry this part, and both men knew it. Railroad time was its own religion, and Emil had been the certified inspector for this stretch of line since 1897. A watch that ran more than 30 seconds off across 7 days did not go back into a man's pocket until Emil had put it right, and every railroad man on the division knew that the paper Emil signed each month was the difference between holding his position and not. 4 seconds fast, Emil said at length, which is inside the standard, and you know it's inside the standard, and you came in anyway. I like it right, Harlan said. So do I. Emil made his small notation in the inspection book, signed the card, and handed the watch back. I'll regulate it a hair. Come by Thursday. Harlan left satisfied, the way he left satisfied the first Tuesday of every month, and Emil made a note in the ledger, and thought, as he generally thought after Harlan's visits, that there were worse things to build a working life on than a small town's collective agreement about exactly what time it was. The shop filled and emptied through the morning in its unhurried way. Mrs. Vance brought in the mantel clock that had come with her from her childhood home in Vermont, wanting only to know whether it could be made to strike properly again, and Emil opened the back of it there on the counter and looked inside and told her honestly that it could, that the trouble was nothing more than a worn lifting piece, and that he'd have it striking by Friday, and it would cost her $1.40. You always say a number right off, she said. My brother-in-law's watch fellow in Springfield never says a number until after. A man who won't name his price before he's done the work has told you something about the price, Emil said, and Mrs. Vance laughed and said she supposed he had at that. Then a father came in with his son, a boy of perhaps 12, for the particular ceremony Emil had presided over more times than he could count. A first watch, not new, a plain nickel-cased thing the father had almost certainly arranged in advance and pretended to select on the spot, and the boy holding it afterward with both hands as though it might be alive. You'll wind it once a day, Emil told him, at the same hour, and you'll not wind it past where it stops. And when it needs cleaning, you'll bring it here and not try it yourself. And I'll show you what I'm doing while I do it, so that by the time you're grown, you'll know. Yes, sir. And it'll keep good time for you your whole life if you treat it decent. Better than you'd think. Better than most things. People came in through the middle of the day for no reason at all except the time. This had never been a service Emil advertised, and had never once been a service he charged for, and it accounted, by his own rough estimate, for something like a fifth of everyone who came through the door in a given week. A man would step in, nod, walk to the regulator, take out his watch, adjust it, put it away, nod again, and leave. The entire transaction conducted in under 30 seconds, and frequently without a word spoken by either party. Emil had come to understand, somewhere around his second decade in the shop, that this was in fact the most important thing his business did. The bank set its clock by his regulator. The school set its bell by the bank. The mill's whistle went off on the school bell, and half the town got out of bed by the mill's whistle, so that a stranger might reasonably have said that this small, severe mahogany instrument on Emil Hartwell's wall was, in a practical sense, what the town ran on. Nobody in the town would have put it that way, and Emil never had either. But he kept the regulator to 4 seconds a month regardless, and had done so for 11 years, and intended to go on doing so for as long as his hands would let him. Mrs. Ostrander came in near 2 with her daughter's small wristwatch, one of the new ones worn on a strap, which Emil regarded with the mild suspicion he reserved for anything invented after 1900 and repaired with exactly the same care as everything else. And Emil told her it wanted only cleaning and would be ready Saturday, and she went away pleased, and the door's bell settled, and the shop went back to its 31 small disagreements. The afternoon Emil gave to the bench, which was where he had spent the great majority of his last 4 decades, and where he was, even now, entirely happy to be. The bench sat under the north window for the light, a scarred wooden slab with a low rail around three sides to keep small parts from wandering, and Emil settled onto his stool and screwed the loop into his eye and disappeared for 2 hours into a world approximately an inch and a half across. This was the part of the trade nobody ever quite understood from outside it, that the work was not fiddly or tedious, but genuinely absorbing, a matter of a mainspring's tension and a balance wheel's poise and the particular way a properly cleaned pivot turned in a jewel with no drag at all. The whole tiny machine, either alive or not alive, depending on things too small to see without help. Emil worked with tweezers and pegwood and a bench key, cleaning pivots, checking end shake, pausing now and then to look at nothing in particular, while his hands went on doing what they had done 10,000 times before. Peter worked the Coleman movement at the second bench, slowly, 3 times slower than Emil would have done it, which was exactly correct and exactly what Emil had told him to be. And twice the boy came to a stop and sat back and looked at the thing for a long moment before going on, which pleased Emil more than any amount of speed would have. "You'll want the fine oil on that cap jewel," Emil said once, without looking over. "How'd you know where I was?" "Because you stopped, and that's where a man stops." Near 4 o'clock, the light through the north window went the particular thin gold of a November afternoon, and Emil set down his tweezers and rolled his shoulders and admitted to himself that his eyes had reached the end of what they'd give him for one day. He'd noticed it coming on for 3 or 4 years now, the hour at which the fine work stopped being possible, arriving a little earlier each season, and he'd made his arrangements accordingly. The delicate jobs done before 3, the winding and casing and simpler repairs saved for the late afternoon, the whole shape of his working day quietly reorganized around a fact he had decided long ago to treat as a scheduling matter and not as anything more dramatic than that. It was, in point of fact, the largest reason Peter was here at all. Emil had never said this to the boy, and did not intend to for some while yet, but the plan had been fully formed in his own mind since before he'd ever agreed to take him on. 5 years of teaching, and then a partnership, and then in due course a shop with a different name over the door and the same regulator on the wall, still gaining its 4 seconds a month, still setting the time for a town that would go on not thinking about it in exactly the way people don't think about the things that work. He finished the afternoon casing up 2 finished movements and writing out 3 tickets, and sent Peter home at 5 with the Coleman movement running clean on the bench, which the boy had done entirely himself, and which Emil told him so once, plainly, and then did not belabor. He closed the shop at 5:30, turned the sign, and did the evening round, checking that the ones he'd regulated were holding, setting 2 that had drifted, standing a moment in front of the regulator to compare it against his own pocket watch, which he had made himself in 1889, and which had not needed anything from him but winding in 22 years. Supper was upstairs, and simple, and afterward Emil sat in his chair by the stove with a cup of coffee, and did not read particularly, and did not do much of anything, which was how he had spent most evenings for a long while, and which suited him. Below, the shop went on ticking. He could hear it through the floor the way he had heard it every night for 41 years. 31 clocks running on 31 slightly different fractions of a second. The sound rising up through the boards as steady and various as weather. He went down once more before bed, as he always did, carrying a lamp to walk the length of the shop and look at them. They were all going. The tall case clock swung its slow arc. The carriage clock hurried very slightly, the way it always had and always would, because it had been made that way in Paris in 1874 by someone long past caring, and Emile had decided years ago that correcting it entirely would be a kind of rudeness. He stood there a while in the lamplight, an old man in a room full of running clocks, and thought about nothing much at all. About Harlan Voss's 4 seconds, and Peter's steady hands on the Coleman movement, and the boy who'd hold that plain nickel watch until he was an old man himself, quite possibly still bringing it here to be cleaned by someone whose name wasn't yet over the door. Then he put out the lamp and went up. The bed was cold, and then wasn't, and Emile lay listening to the sound coming up through the floor, the same sound he had gone to sleep to since he was 32 years old, and let the day settle out of his shoulders. He thought, without any urgency, of Mrs. Vance's lifting piece, and of Thursday, and of Harlan's watch wanting its hair of regulation. It arranged itself in the proper order somewhere behind his closing eyes and asked nothing further of him. Below him, the shop kept its 31 opinions about the hour, none of them quite agreeing, all of them near enough. The whole room ticking on through the dark, the way it would go on ticking whether or not anyone was awake to hear it, through the night and through the morning and through a good many years yet after that. Emile Hartwell's eyes closed, and he slept.